to my channel, Anglican Aesthetics. I want to try to make this a quick video, and I want to argue and convince you that dialoguing, the lost art of conversation, can save America. In other words, it won't be who you vote for. It won't be even the policies you advocate for. It won't even be necessarily your political participation on a local level, although that's really important, that will save this country. What we need to save the country is the lost art of dialogue. Okay, here's what I mean. What do we need to be saved from as a country? Well, as has been said endlessly, we live in a very polarized age. What does that mean? It means people have sort of flocked to the extremes and view each other as the enemy. They view each other as a threat to their own existence, such that when you even start to engage them, one person might check out. They're looking for a soundbite to undermine you, or something like this, something to this effect. What I want to argue is that dialogue trains us in habits and virtues that we have lost in the social media age. In a social media era, we have been trained through the algorithm, and the algorithm here, I'm just using that as a shorthand for the overall methods and systems of data collection and content feed and all of this stuff. The things that sort of determine what content is suggested or presented to you. The algorithm works by, from your past engagement with things, trying to feed you content that will rile you up, that will drive engagement. And it's not therefore concerned about nuance. It's not therefore concerned about making you a balanced person. It's just concerned about giving you content that you're just going to eat up. And because we're not naturally virtuous, all of us, just as human beings, we will look for dopamine hits. So what engages us will often be what those things that rile us up, that maybe we already agree with, and that make us, that drive us into our silos. Conversation, dialogue, forces us to view ideological others as human beings and to engage them as human beings. Dialogue is an act of communion with another person, to hear their thoughts, at least it's an opportunity to hear their thoughts as they are, as they're formed and being formed by another person. And it requires you to receive those and to engage them, either pushback, agreeing, refinement, whatever it might be. Dialogue trains you in virtues that push back against the vices we've acquired by being addicted to shorts or sound bites. Most human beings do not think in sound bites. Most of us, when we're forming our views internally, we're trying to articulate and formulate a whole bunch of different thoughts that are running through our heads. That's true of the vast majority of us. And so to demand that another person present their thought as a soundbite or bust is not to receive them as the kind of person they are, as the kind of people we all are. It's not to receive people as they are. So dialogue, conversation, is, I think, the solution to the kind of polarized tension, the kind of butting heads with each other that drive us into viewing each other as the enemies. Now, no, I'm not saying that through dialogue we'll all come to agree. That just doesn't happen. It never happens. Normally on this side, before Jesus' return at least, we're never going to come to perfect agreement. But dialogue forces us to cultivate two virtues that right now American culture squeezes out of us. The virtue of patience, because in dialoguing I have to be patient to try to receive another person's thoughts as they're coming to me. I don't always do this well, but that's the virtue that dialogue cultivates. And humility, because good dialoguing requires that you try to present the other person's argument as they would agree with it, which admits the possibility that I might be misunderstanding someone. I might say, okay, it sounds like you're saying this, and that opens me up to the possibility that the other person isn't saying that, so I've misunderstood, which means I have to go back into the position of a receiver to say, okay, like, help me understand what you're saying. So dialogue cultivates patience with each other, which is essential for a human community, and humility, by which we humbly receive what the other is saying in order to engage them in the effort to pursue the common good. For the rest of this video, I just want to sketch what good dialogue looks like. What are the rules of good dialogue in this time? There are 3 rules I'm going to suggest. 3 is an easy number to remember, and there are 3 that are helpful to me as I do this imperfectly alongside you guys. And they are these. When I was in college, I had a professor, Mark Talbot, philosophy professor at Wheaton College, who said, and I'll never forget this, my whole life, I'll just never forget this, that not only is it an intellectual flaw to fail to understand the other person, he said it's immoral. It is immoral to critique another person's argument without understanding their argument. I think he's absolutely right. Which means, in the context of the polis, the city, right, the political body of which we are all a part, if I critique someone else's position, I have to labor first, before critique, to understand what they're saying. That already cuts against so much of what's pushing polarization, right? So, for instance, I hear all the time that people are only voting for Trump because they're maybe morally degenerate, they're moral garbage, they want to control women, or I hear people pushing against the pro-life position that I hold because you just want to control women's bodies, right? Conversely, I hear people pushing back voting for Harris and Walz because those people just want to enable a genocide, or those people just want to, enable the abuse of children under the sort of regime of LGBTQ plus ideology, things like this, right? It's much easier to speak into the abstract, of people like that, and sometimes there's truth to generalizations. It's not like all generalizations are wrong because they're generalizations, but the problem is generalizations are difficult to make. But secondly, whether we know it or not, when we do that, we are sort of training ourselves to view people through a grid. So, for instance, I am not voting for Trump or Harris. I'm voting American Solidarity Party. However, a lot of my friends are voting for either Trump, or a lot of my friends are voting for Kamala Harris. Okay, so what should I do? I hope I do this better than I have, but I'm still growing. Hopefully, what I do instead of just, if I encounter someone who's voting for Kamala Harris, my hope is that my assumption isn't, okay, that person just doesn't care about children. What I need to do is treat that person as a person and say, tell me why you're voting for Harris. And if I disagree with them, okay, great. We can have a conversation. We can push back. We need to push back. We need to sort of, dialogue it out. That's part of political participation. But then when I understand their reasons, I want to try to repeat their reasoning in a way that they feel like I'm understanding them. So the first rule of etiquette, of dialogical etiquette, is try to articulate your ideological opponent's argument in a way that they would agree with. You're articulating their argument such that they would say, yes, that is what I'm saying. And sometimes you might get this wrong, right? We all might get this wrong. We might fail at certain points to do this well. We might articulate what we're hearing, and the other person says, "Yeah, I'm not quite saying that." So that requires the humility to say, "Okay, then help me clarify where I'm wrong in understanding your argument." So again, rule number one: uh, you need to articulate the other person's argument in a way they would understand. That actually also really applies to good reading as well. Good reading of arguments is the art of trying to read an author such that you feel confident you could go up to that author. If they're dead, of course you can't, but you feel like if you could go up to them and repeat their argument, they would say, "Yes, that is what that's what I'm saying." Okay, second rule of dialogical etiquette. Um, as much as you can, uh, do not bring in an accusation of motives when you're at the level of understanding someone's position, right? So, know what I'm not saying. I'm not saying we don't critique each other's character. There is a place for that. There is a place for critiquing character attributes people have shown, but that comes after you make sure you understand their argument. So don't critique their character of someone in your orbit who disagrees with you until you understand their reasoning. Now, to give an example of this, right, where does character critique come in? Okay, so I once had a friend, this is a true story, who said, I, man, it's sad to think of it. She said she supported abortion all the way to full term. And I said, okay, like that's really disturbing. Why do you think that? Because it's part of the woman's body, even if it's just attached to um, you to the uterus by the umbilical cord at all. It's still part of the woman's body. Okay, even though it feels pain, even though it feels suffering. She said yes to all of those. So I repeated, okay, so you're saying that even though this child, this fetus, feels pain, has memories, would suffer in being maybe ripped apart a day before birth, you're saying that's actually okay because it's not a human being. She said yes. At that point, okay, because I'm understanding her argument. At that point, I'm okay with saying, yeah, that's degenerate. That is an abominable character. It is utterly wicked to hold that sort of view. So again, it's not that character critique doesn't factor into things, but it's that character critique comes after you make sure you've understood why someone's saying what they're saying. Okay, what is rule number 3? Rule number 3 is go to the primary source. So it's very easy. It's tempting. We've all done this, right? Where we try to learn another person's argument without speaking to that person or engaging their source material directly. This happens in scholarship, right? Like this has happened to me all the time. I've done this where I assume, for instance, I know Barth's view on something, or I know Calvin's view, or I know Bellarmine's view, Roman Catholic, right? Or I know some atheist view. I know Nietzsche's view on X, right? And I've never read the primary sources, and I'm only saying that because someone else told me that, or some group told me that, right? Now, groups, again, the extreme to this is to say, okay, well, groups don't matter, groups are unimportant, like secondary sources are just nonsense. No, secondary sources can help introduce you to an intellectual sparring partner. They can help clarify that intellectual sparring partner, and they can sort of serve as confirmation. Like, are we hearing this person the same way as we're engaging this conversation partner? But you have to go to the conversation partner themselves before you start critiquing their argument, because people can get it wrong, right? Like, secondary sources can misrepresent primary sources. Even if you think they're generally reliable, that gives you some like evidence that, okay, well, maybe this is what that person says, right? So to give a kind of example of this, I very much benefit from Jordan Cooper's sort of lectures on the makers of the modern world series, right? Or there's a philosopher, Michael Sugrue, who gave a lecture on Stoicism that is interesting and helpful. But then the next step after hearing a lecture like that isn't to say, okay, well, now I understand Marcus Aurelius, or now in Cooper's case, right, I understand Saussure or whoever, right? Uh, the next step after hearing a lecture on those people is to then go to the primary source. In political discourse, here's what that looks like. Suppose you hear on some podcast that, okay, Harris said she's going to fight for abortions to be legal all the way up to birth. The question to ask is where's the primary source? And there might be, but you actually have to find that first. Or Trump said that he's going to ban abortion, and which he's not going to do, and some of us, yeah, that's just an interesting. Anyway, he's going to ban abortion and make people who get unplanned pregnancies like wear barcodes or something like this. Okay, someone claims that on a podcast, then you have to go to the primary source. So I've encountered this before where I might be talking to someone. I'm just going to use a random example. This didn't happen. I don't think this happened, but like just kind of for illustration. Like let's say I'm talking about okay, I'll use an example because this happened this past Sunday about Gadamer, right? I was actually talking with Gadamer about someone, and we have different reads on Gadamer, right? So he was like, yeah, Gadamer came up with the reader response view, and that just makes all sort of literary interpretation subjective. I don't read Gadamer that way. But then, like, what we can't do is just say, oh, well, you're just wrong, or, like to my ideological opponent or vice versa. We actually have to go back to Gadamer, right? And to then say, okay, what did he say? Or let's say, to sort of make the example more pertinent, right? My friend is hearing his information from some lecture that he took in college, and I'm getting my information from some lecturer I heard in college. And then we're just both sparring because my teacher told me this, right? Well, dialogical etiquette entails going back to the primary source or the origin point as much as we can to that claim to figure out what was actually said. Okay, so to end this video, here are 3 rules. 3 rules that I think can save the country in its state of polarization. Rule number 1 for good dialogue. You need to be able to state what the other person says in a way that they would agree with. In other words, you need to restate their argument such that they would say, yes, that is my argument. Rule number 2, character critique only comes after you've done one. You can critique someone's character. It's not like it's off the table, but you don't start to critique character when you're at step 1, when you're doing rule number 1 and trying to understand what someone else is saying. Okay, and then rule number 3, go back to the primary source. So you hear someone claim that Trump believes or Harris believes whatever policy. Okay, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Then it's incumbent now on you, if that's something you care about, it's something you think is significant, to then, as much as you can, go back to the primary source. Okay, so those are some rules that I think can help save the country, and I hope that blesses you in your personal, local, embodied relationships as well. God bless.